these wild rewards. Why do we worry about that? Well, I'm going to postpone that discussion because when we get to drugs, you'll see why we worry about that. Because these things precondition teen brains to become addicted. And these are things that are new in our culture, a bunch of things that relate to the opioid crisis. So I'll hold you in suspense on that for a second. Another thing about teenagers is they don't go to sleep when the rest of us do. They stay up later. That's actually Mother Nature. She has programmed teenagers to stay up later than adults. And that's probably from our days back on the plains. The teenagers, back 500,000 years ago, teenagers were the alarm systems of the herds because they had the best eyesight and the best hearing. That's the leading theory on this. So they would stay up most of the night to guard the herd. And then as it gets to dawn, teenagers would go to sleep. And we see it in animal studies still today. And then the young and the older wake up. Does that sound like Saturday and Sunday morning in your house? Yeah, it's the same behavior. But who do we typically get up first in the morning and off to school? The teenagers. Is that still happening in these schools? Yeah, we're turning it around. It's a monstrous logistical challenge. But we've turned it around in a couple of school districts, and the results are stunning. When we bring the teens in, just giving them another hour of sleep, it's amazing. Academic issues get much better. Test scores are better. Behavioral issues go way down. Health issues go way up. Do you know how many hours of sleep your kid's supposed to be getting? Yeah, 9 to 10. And that's an average. Do you know how many hours the American teenager is getting these days? About 6. Slightly less than 6 is the last number I saw. Think about that one fact. I know, let's do an experiment. I'm going to do psych exams on all you guys tonight. I'm going to line you up, we'll do a psych exam, see how you're doing. And then we're going to cut your sleep by a third, and we'll let you go 3 months. And then we'll bring you back and we'll do another evaluation. How are you going to be? Yeah, a little ADHD, depressed, anxious, maybe life doesn't look like it's worth living. Have you ever remembered being that exhausted? Can you remember that? It's good. Remember when the baby first came? Excuse me. I remember my eyeballs hurting when the babies were young. I never experienced that in the military, but I remember my eyeballs hurt because I wasn't getting any sleep. So, yeah, think about that and fighting through the fog in the morning. Remember that? And nothing looked good except maybe not being alive. And drugs look good. Drinking goes up. Pot use goes up with adults who are also sleep deprived. Those things look really good. So if I become king of the world, still waiting for the call, the first rule will be teenagers get 10 hours of sleep. And I'll essentially be out of business. I'll be retiring. I'm very serious because a lot of this insanity and death and dying will go away by letting them sleep the way they were built to sleep. So enough of that. A second anti-resilience factor is the world around them. The world around them has kind of gone off the tracks in a bunch of ways that attack resilience. We look at these things in terms of expectations that have gotten extreme, expectations of academics and athletics and socialization. The athletic expectations, I played a little basketball back in the day. I couldn't make the team here. I know I couldn't, because your team here is what used to be college, maybe D2, in my day. Because your kids have been working at this in these specialized sport camps since age 4 and 5, and they're amazingly good. I go to the games and say, oh my God, these kids are great. They're unbelievable. But what's happened is that it's become a grind. I had a couple of kids I worked with. One was an all-state soccer star, and he was offered a whole bunch of scholarships to college, and he turned them down. His parents went wild. You got to make him take the scholarships. And he said, they taught me how to hate my sport. They taught me how to hate the sport. And it stuck in my head. This is like a pro saying, I'm burnt out. I just can't play this game anymore. I'm done. And, he went back and found his love by playing club, pickup, and coaching So, he reignited his passion. But it was so poignant, and I see so many of these kids. Academics, the same thing. Kids are taking on courses they're not built to do. These AP courses, even honors courses, it's taken on a life of its own. Do you know where it came from? It was about 20 years ago. A team of economists wrote this study, which was flawed, and they said, you got to get your kids into elite schools. You get to an elite school, kind of guaranteed to do well in life. And that set off this whole insanity about these elite schools and the prep programs and beating kids. Well, we've done other studies since, and guess what? It ain't the school, it's the kid. The research was flawed. They actually apologized, to their credit. 2 of the 3 wrote a thing saying, sorry, we're really sorry we did that. We hadn't thought it out. We didn't do the proper research. Guys, it's not the elite school. And getting A's in AP classes in high school, the relationship between that and what we call life happiness is either neutral or negative. In other words, the kids that punish themselves at these early ages can develop all these secondary illnesses, the anxiety, the depression, suicidal thought, drug abuse. What the big rage on college campuses is now, what's the drug? Adderall. Yeah, ADHD medications. Well, they're doing the other drugs too to relax, but the kids are wild with ADHD is methamphetamine, ADHD medications for the most part, because they're all hyped up trying to do this incredible task they're not really ready to do. So they're using these drugs to alter their performance, like steroids with athletes sort of stuff. It's just gotten crazy. If it worked, if it had something to do with life happiness, I don't know, maybe, but it doesn't. It goes in the other direction. Again, excessive expectations. And the social aspects, well, you guys have seen it. The daughters and now the boys are caught up in it, trying to manage perceptions of often 100 individuals. How many friends did you have in high school that you really cared about? Yeah, exactly. I had a couple. How many bullies did you have in high school? I had one. It was a tough school. There was occasional fights, but there's only one real bully. We worked it out. It was John McMahon. He would come down the hall. He'd see me. I'd punch myself in the face and fall down. We done here, John? Yeah, we're done here. And he became a probation officer, by the way. Isn't that funny? But in any event, I thought it was, not fun. It's nothing compared to the stress your kids have. Your kids are like the PR, public relations press secretary for a senator or whatever, constantly monitoring the social buzz, the network, and having to respond to every threat, every nuance, every rumor. It's nuts. Where is it coming from? The electronics. The electronics have changed everything. By electronics, I mean screens, smartphones, the tablets, the computers, and so forth. We had no idea what we were unleashing when we handed kids this stuff. And every year that goes by, we get more research that says that was a huge mistake. A friend of mine, peer, named Jean Twenge, wrote a book, and I may be misquoting the title, but I read her article, and I think the title is, Have Smartphones Destroyed a Generation of Teenagers? And you can get the preface article in the New Yorker, I think it was like November. I think the book's due out in March. Jean is not some radical, bomb thrower kind of person. She's a serious researcher, scientist, and she's come up with data that are stunning about what this has done to our kids, the screens. She's found out that a lot of the good news we were flouting turns out to be bad news. What's the good news in the teen risk research? One, they're not having as many pregnancies. Unintended pregnancy is way down. And all the sex ed people were saying, see, we're doing a good job, this is terrific. Jean found out the reason that it's down, we don't have any young children here, right? That they're not having sex, they're having cyber sex in much greater numbers, and it's casual cyber sex. It's with anybody they pick up online. They're not in the world experiencing, not that they should be having sex or certainly risk sex or unintended pregnancies, but they're not learning how to do relationships. They can't order takeout food. They can fill out the form, but if they have to call and make an order, they get paralyzed. Have you had that happen? Mom, you got to talk. Yeah, they're paralyzed at ordering food in restaurants. So they're also crashing cars less. And we said, oh, great, driver's ed is really working. Gene pulled it apart and said, no, it's because they're driving less. They're much happier having their parents drive. They don't want to deal with the hassle of learning how to drive. In other words, Gene is saying, and I agree, they're retreating into the screens at the exclusion of the real world and learning how to deal with that. The more they retreat, the less they are able to handle the real world. And they do get all bound up. They're not building resilience. All the things they get pummeled with on those screens are incredibly powerful. If you want a metaphor for it, if you remember tough issues that hit you back in the day as a teenager, things like drugs and sex or violence sort of issues, well, that was muskets. Today, kids are being hit with machine guns because of the incessant bombardment of what goes on the screens. And it is very, very powerful bombardment. 2 examples that we came up with, because everybody said, can it really affect kids? Yes, very much so. The AMA did a big study, landmark study, about why kids start smoking cigarettes. Now, kids are overall smoking less cigarettes, which is okay, but while I'm thinking of it, they're vaping more. And we now know that vaping leads to cigarette smoking, which leads to marijuana smoking, which leads to other things. These are all gateways. So the vaping is a disaster. It cannot be allowed. You just can't let kids do that. Again, why? The reward circuits. They're hyperactive, and they love the vaping. They become addicted very, very quickly to that. And then the vaping stops paying off, and they move to the real thing. Well, anyway, we did a study. Why did kids start smoking cigarettes? And they found out that the greatest predictor of a kid starting to smoke cigarettes is how many times they saw a screen figure smoke a cigarette. They controlled for all the other factors, parents who smoke, socioeconomic class, peers who smoke, all that stuff. It was how many screen images they saw of smoking that lit up that desire to try cigarette smoking. So what they see does affect their behavior. How about what they hear? Another study was done, again at AMA, looking at sexual violence with young women. They were, at the time, just women, but boys are also exposed to this. And they found a direct correlation between sexual violence and the amount of sexually violent lyrics, misogynist lyrics, aggressive, terrible lyrics, that the girls and the boys listened to. 2.7 times greater incident of sexual violence among kids who have heard those lyrics. Guys, teen brains are soft. They're not defended. You would hear those lyrics and be horrified. Kids listen to the lyrics and they're like, wow, that's unusual. And they kind of immerse themselves in this stuff, and it burns in the circuits of the brain. And they are acting out these behaviors they are exposed to. Third set of stress that we're seeing, third source, is drugs. Drug use is also something you've had a lot of education on, I assume. You've had some great programs here. But the short course is that we have an upside-down hockey stick, that over the past several decades we had this incredible increase, and then it leveled off and it's hanging about the same, up and down. We get some good news, but then it turns out bad news is because they're just shifting to another drug. We think, for example, that booze is down. Kids are drinking less, and everybody's cheering about that. But marijuana has exploded among the kids. And by the way, the vaping is often marijuana. You don't know it because they use oils in the vaping devices, and some of the vaping devices look like pens. And that's what the kids are doing in school, is smoking marijuana. And the oils that they use can be anywhere from 3 to 9 times as potent as a weed back in your day. They should rename marijuana. It's a different drug. It's unfair to just call it weed because it's a super drug and it has much more powerful impact than we ever realized. And it's just at the time where we are decriminalizing and legalizing it. Guess what that means to teenagers? This is safe, not a problem. And they'll come and argue with you with research that says, see, weed doesn't hurt anybody. They've done all these studies. Two things. One, in my day, it was cigarettes. And remember the 7 dwarfs? You should punch that. The cigarette manufacturers, the presidents, the owners, CEOs, got up and lied before Congress, saying these are not addictive. They didn't know there's no science that said it was addictive. The SOBs were manipulating the nicotine content and using other things like menthol to make them more powerfully addicted. They were lying. That's where the huge settlement came from with the tobacco companies. Same thing's going on with weed. Now, is weed okay for adults to smoke? I actually don't know a lot about the science of weed in adults. I suspect it's the same as with alcohol. I think it's relatively the same risk. But guys, teenagers can't use these neuroaddictive substances. That's alcohol, weed, any of the other drugs. They cannot use them. How do we know that? Well, one, we've actually got pictures, MRIs of the brain changes, structural changes in the brain, in the reward circuits when kids do smoke. So we can see that the brain is actually reconfigured. You all know about fetal alcohol syndrome. When a woman is pregnant, they say, don't drink, not even one drink. We can't find a lower limit of safe alcohol use in later stages of gestation because that alcohol just gets right into the baby and causes terrible things. Same thing with weed with teenagers. Guys, when a baby is in the last couple of months of development, that's when the brain is actually growing inside the fetus, just like the brain is growing inside your teenager's head. It is that fragile. And whatever hits it will have tremendous impact, much more so than in an adult brain. The second thing that tells us that teens cannot use any of these substances is just numbers. Bear with me on this. Picture a group of 25 kids, and they all get together, and they decide, we're going to start smoking and drinking regularly, which we define as once a week or more. So of those 25 kids, if they have this decision at age 21, you got it? 25, 21-year-olds get together, say, hey, we're 21, let's start using. They didn't use before to any significant degree. Of those 25 kids, one will become an addict to some substance. Addiction is defined as it takes over their life. They lose everything. They live to do the drug. That could be heroin. Increasingly it is. It could be methamphetamine. It could be cocaine. It could be a bunch of things. So 1 out of the 25 will become an addict. Okay. What about a group of 18-year-olds? Of 25 18-year-olds, 3 will become full-blown addicts. What about at age 16? Of 25 16-year-olds, 6 will become addicts. And what about at age 14, where increasingly we're seeing it bubble down to that age that kids start smoking and or drinking at age 14 or lower. Of a group of 25 14-year-olds, 17 of them will become addicts. You got that? It couldn't be any plainer. The younger somebody starts using this stuff, they're rewiring their brain and setting it up to be predisposed to addiction. And this is where I'm going to end up having people yell at me because they're going to say things like, well, I smoked a little bit and I drank a little bit back in the day. Your numbers must be off. It's a different world. First, in terms of potency, again, the weed is so much more potent than it was back in the day. And second, drinking, I thought we were bad back in the day. We would steal a couple beers, God forbid the old man found out, and drink them in the park. Today, when a kid says, yeah, I was drinking, you know what they're talking about? Running shots. Drinking until no offense, they call it drinking till I'm retarded. They binge drink, 6 shots or more. And they do that 1, 2, 3 nights a week. And those are the good kids because they're not doing heavy drugs. Oh, Dr. Bradley, I don't do drugs. I just get drunk 2 or 3 times a week. It's a drug. So this is the missing piece of the opioid crisis. Why is that? Everybody's focused on the drugs are being overprescribed and Big Pharma was conning people, saying everything was safe with opioids, and that's all true, I think, anyway. But they've missed the key piece. What is the key piece? It has to do with reward circuit damage by parents being laid back with our kids smoking and drinking as teenagers. Here's the way it works. If you call this the baseline of where your neurotransmitters should be, so if your baseline is here, you're doing okay. Like you go out in the morning, beautiful day, glad I'm alive, right? Like, wow, cool, you get a little payoff. When kids use, when teenagers use, they get an explosion of the feel-good chemical, an avalanche, to the point that the brain says we're overdosed, and the brain shuts down their own production system for the reward. Then as they come down, they don't stop at baseline. They start go a little bit below baseline. If they use again, within a week, they shoot back up, but they don't go quite to where they got up the first time. And when they come down, they don't stop at baseline, they don't stop at the prior bottom, they go a little bit lower. So what are we talking about? A descending roller coaster, where kids then smoke more and more to try to just get back up to baseline. Kids will come into my office and say, I smoke 5 times a day, I'm sick, I'm broke, my girlfriend dumped me, my teeth are yellow, I hate this, but I can't function anymore. And this is weed, that drug that doesn't addict people. Well, when they're down here, they either quit, good luck with that, because that's a hell to try to get through, because it can take up to a year for the reward circuits to come back online. We call that no man's land. And that's where I'm just like pleading with kids, hang in there, hang in there. I guarantee that beautiful morning will come back to you, but you gotta hang in there. And how do you ask a teenager to do that? Adults can't do it. In any event, then they get the magic moment. If they don't get sober, a friend says, hey, why don't you try one of these pills? Bang, they find Jesus. They're just, oh my God. And they start on another descending roller coaster. They move on to the next drug and the next drug. The last train stop is heroin. Train Spotting, the movie, check it out. It's heroin. And that is the last stop on that train. So what is the missing piece, guys? We are the pushers. We have been asleep at the helm by being cool with kids doing weed and booze on weekends. They're changing their brains. They're being predisposed to addiction. Why did we suddenly have an opioid addiction? Do you know that opioids have been around forever? You know that? Yeah. When you were young, you may have gotten opioids. I got hurt in the military. They put me on opioids, and I was like, ugh, I hate this stuff. I feel stupid and get sick. I don't like this. My brain wasn't pre-wired to react to opioids. Our kids often are. And when they hit that opioid, they have the magical experience. It's nirvana. You ever talk to a heroin addict? You should talk to a heroin addict, because they say life can't compete. Watch the movie Train Spotting. It's all there. So this is where I believe 55 to 60% of the opioid epidemic came from, and nobody wants to talk about it because it makes us uncomfortable. And then I have arguments with parents, as I just had last week in a very nice area, and a woman said, well, if I tell my daughter she can't smoke weed, she won't have any friends. If I tell my daughter she can't smoke weed, she won't have any friends. How can I do that? So I asked her, well, a little bit about the family. And then I said, do you have fire insurance? And she said, yeah. And I said, okay. Why do you have fire insurance? She said, it would be a catastrophe if the house burned down. And I said, yeah, absolutely. Do you know what the odds are that a house might burn down? She said, no, and I actually looked it up. Turns out it was 20%. And I was guessing. I said, maybe it's 10%, 20%. But let's just assume it's 20%. You think it's wise to pay out all that money? She said, absolutely. And I said, based on your genetic history and what you're telling me about your daughter's use, she's got about a 25% odd of becoming an addict. Is that not a catastrophe? Isn't this something you do draw the line in the sand for and say, sorry, you can't use? People say, you can't really stop it. Yes, you can. You have the power. And I'm not talking about the power that you may think you have of searches and drug tests and so forth. all that stuff may be necessary, and if you read the books, we lay it all out in terms of, how you address kids' drug use. But you know what the most powerful tool in your arsenal is? Saying to your kid lovingly, firmly, that you disagree with their use of drugs, and you intend to not allow it to happen, that you have a loving expectation they will not use until they're age 21. A loving expectation. You start with, honey, I love you. It's my expectation you will not use until you're 21. I love you. This stuff could take you out. And kids will bitch and moan, but you hang firm on that. That turns out to be the most powerful deterrent factor we have. Parents who are kind of nice about everything else, go crazy over the room and the smelly shoes and all that stuff and the mess in the sink. But boy, you stand up suddenly, all business, when drugs come in the picture and say, this is not going to happen on my watch. Not going to happen. It's not screaming. It's not making them afraid. It's actually going after their belief system. When my son Ross went off to college, I did the thing. I said, Ross, I'm so proud of you. This is great. Just to let you know, it's my expectation you will not drink until you're 21. He said, Dad, you know what goes on at college. I said, yeah, unfortunately I do. I'm telling you, son, I love you. I know a lot about this stuff. It's my expectation that you will not drink. I'll take you out for your first beer at 21. Until then, I'll do everything I can to stop it. Do not come home with beer. Do not bring kids home and drink in my house. It's just not going to happen. And he kind of laughed. And then at age 25, he said, by the way, Dad, remember that talk we had? And I said, yeah. He said, you spoiled my high. I said, what are you talking about? He said, well, the beer was flowing, and I couldn't get your voice out of my head. He said, I couldn't get into it. You spoiled my high. And boy, did that make my day. Yeah. He actually left campus. My son, by the way, is like this. He's, athlete, incredible, chiseled, tattooed, long hair, heavy metal musician, also a school teacher. He ain't no altar boy. And he left college because it was so out of control. He said it's just nuts. They start drinking Thursday at noon, and they keep drinking into Sunday. They don't even clean the bathrooms because there's no point because of the puke all over the place. So my heavy metal son said, wow, you guys are too crazy for me, and booked out of there. How does that happen? The drinking rates at college have exploded. Why? I already told you. Because we said it's okay, smoke a little weed with your friends and be popular and all like that. That is the enemy that we're dealing with. And you can become the rescuer with a simple attitude to start with. Let's see where we are time-wise. Do I have more? Can I push on? A couple of other things you need to know that are different about your kids' world. One, we have a lot of data where we compared kids over 50 years with the same tests that we've used for 50 years, and there's some stunning differences. One, your kid feels little control over the outcome of her life. How could that be? We were so stunned by this because you give them everything, right? In my day, we didn't have much. Today, most of the kids in areas like this have way too much. So how could they feel no control? But it's true. They feel that they are unable to direct the outcome of their lives. I remember being young, a teenager, and kids were talking about what we were going to do. That if we weren't stupid, we didn't hold up the 7-Eleven and all like that, we could get out of the hood. We felt there was a path. Kids today feel it's a crapshoot. Second thing that's changed, their goals are now extrinsic and materialistic. We have these tests where we would say essentially to kids, what is it about? What's the point of existence? Back in the day, believe it or not, most teenagers would say things like, I want to do something important. I want to change lives. I want to be a cop. I want to be an army officer. I want to be a school teacher, whatever. I want to do something. Well, guess what kids respond mostly today by saying? I want to have a 4-car garage. I want to have all the exotic cars. I want to have lots of women, lots of money. He who dies with the most toys wins. Their goals have gone extrinsic and materialistic. That's a recipe for depression because it ain't no happy life. It's not a fulfilling life. They're less spontaneous and inner-directed. Why? We take charge of their lives. We run them from one structured activity to the next. They're not negotiating. They're not out in the street trying to figure out the rules of a game that nobody understands. When I grew up in our playground was a dump behind the house, no joke, in Southwest Philadelphia. Boy, it was a little dangerous. I don't recommend it, but you learn a lot. You learn how to navigate. You learn how to handle the bully and the crazy and the dangerous stuff by getting a little dangerous, by not being supervised, by being thrown in unstructured activities. When your kid says, as my son did, he wants to have a rock and roll band and try to do that in the summer instead of going for the Johns Hopkins Summer Science Enrichment Program, do the rock and roll band. We've measured it. He'll learn more doing a rock and roll band. Think about it. It's managing personnel, negotiating, doing motivational things, all the headaches and trying to get a band to work. What happens at Johns Hopkins? We hand you a syllabus. Please memorize that. Here's the test, nicely done, go away. There's no creativity. There's no open field running. And that's how we've lost that particular piece that has to do with resilience. Finally, they're much less self-reliant. Why? I touched on it before. We don't let them fail. We think we should insulate them from failure. That's a disaster. When Ross was 13, he came home and he announced that he was in a gifted social studies program. He said, I'm not going to do social studies. I just want to let you know I will not participate in the class because I've been reading, and social studies is a mind control program by the government. This is history written by rich white men, and I will not participate in that. And Cindy, who's a teacher, she's also an ex-therapist, my wife, looked at each other and she kind of winked. We said, well, okay, cool. Hey, you're a young man, you're a good kid, and you want to make that decision, go ahead. And he looked at us like, you're okay if I don't participate. I said, absolutely. But just to let you know, if and when the teacher calls up, we're going to hand the phone to you, right? Does that work out? I said, yeah, absolutely. Well, of course, we had the meeting at the end of the semester. The teacher, I'll never forget, he had the shadows like 9 o'clock at night, and he was exhausted. His tie's down, and he's behind the desk. He's a real neat guy. And he said, I need to talk to you about the grade for your son, Ross. And Cindy and I looked at each other and said, okay. And I said, what's the problem? And he said, well, if I did it by the numbers, he would be getting an F. And he looked down. And we looked at each other and we said, okay, you didn't have to call us in for this. And he said, you're okay if I give your son an F? I said, absolutely. He put his pencil down and he slid his chair back and he crossed his arms and he said, I've been teaching here for 9 years. We're in a district like this. We pay the teachers real well. And it's, one of those areas. And he said, 9 years, you're the first set of parents that did not argue for a better grade for their kid. And I said, look, we moved here because we want really high-quality teachers, which means if my kid earns an A, give him an A. If he earns an F, give him the F, because he needs to figure this stuff out. It's great to make a stand, but if you're going to make a stand, you're going to do civil disobedience, you get arrested. You go to jail. You pay the price. Doesn't mean it's a bad thing to do. You got to pay the price. I'm not going to bail you out. Well, Ross got the F, and when he heard he was getting the F, he stayed up the whole weekend, day before the last day of this semester, and he wrote this amazing paper defending his position that social studies was a mind control program written by rich white men. It was very impressive, and he gave it to the social studies guy. And the social studies guy said, Ross, this is fantastic. Ross, this is really well done. I would like to submit it to this whatever journal.